Welcome to the ESNT 2013 Update webinar. This webinar was created to provide you with the information for the updated curriculum that has been included in the Electronic Security Networking Technician Training and Certification Program as of the first of the year 2013. New technologies have come into our industry and they will be discussed during this webinar. Here is what we will be talking about in the next 45 minutes or so. These are the new curriculum items that have been added to the ESNT curriculum. The first one is the use of coaxial copper cables for Ethernet and power over Ethernet transmission and applications. The second one is knowledge about cloud recording and video management systems and how they apply to the electronic security business, particularly having to do with video, obviously. The third one is demonstrating the knowledge of the HD video format, because more and more of the manufacturers are producing IP cameras now that are built, designed to work with the HD format, so you need to know what that's about, and we're going to talk about that. And we'll also talk about pixel calculations, which is an important thing to consider on your higher-end systems when your customer says, I want to be able to recognize the people that come through the door, or I want to be able to identify the people that come through the door or come walking through their parking lot. We have to consider the proper resolution that we need and the proper pixel calculations. So these are the basic things that have been added to the ESNT curriculum for the 2013 update. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is Ethernet and PoE over coaxial cables. The reason that this is a very important thing for you to understand and very important for our industry is that there are literally millions of existing coaxial cables that have already been installed on all the analog CCTV systems, the hundreds of thousands of systems that have been installed in the U.S. and Canada. Just since 9/11, over 35 million surveillance cameras have been installed in the United States. And of those 35 million cameras, 95% or more are analog cameras on coax cable. So that old coax cable that's been in the wall for 10 or 15 years or 5 years can now be used to transmit both Ethernet communications and power over Ethernet, standardized PoE. So what this does is it provides a tremendous opportunity for security dealers to upgrade and expand existing systems that have a coax network, coax cabling already run around the building. Where there is one camera, now we can connect up an IP camera. We could also hook up an access control reader or an intercom system, all running through the very same coax cable that you or somebody else installed 2 years ago or 15 years ago. The other thing that's important about the ability to use coax cable and to transmit Ethernet is that it can provide much greater distance than Cat5, Cat6, Cat6e UTP cable, which is limited to that 100 meters or 328 feet, which was discussed in an earlier webinar. When we go to coax cable, we can go up to 1,500 feet between the head-end device and the remote devices. This is a tremendous advantage if we need those longer distances. So we can use the existing coaxes that are there, or we can install new coax, which frankly is going to be less expensive than installing fiber optics and terminating that type of cable technology, and we can go much greater distances. So there's a lot of advantages to this use of these coax cables for Ethernet and PoE. Now, to be able to properly understand the coax cable situation, you got to know what coax cables are, what the numbers mean, and that sort of thing. So we're going to talk about those for a few minutes. What you see in the lower right-hand side is the basic construction of a coaxial cable. We've got that center conductor. You see it sticking out. It's copper-colored. Then we get the white stuff. It's called a dielectric, and that is a does not conduct electricity element. It's usually a plastic. Around that is the shielding material, which could be, there's different grades of shielding. There's braided shielding, which you see illustrated here. There's foil shielding, there's screen shielding, there's some vendors have what they call quad shielding, where they put all 4 types of shielding on their cable, and then there's an outside jacket. Now, one thing I want you to understand now, because it'll be important later, is that a coaxial cable, even though it only has that one center conductor, and it looks like it's a 1-conductor cable, it's not. It's a 2-conductor cable. Electrical signals are going to come down through that center pin, yeah, that's for sure, but the shielding also provides a path. So what looks like a 1-conductor cable is actually a 2-conductor cable. Now, the most common types of coax used in our industry are the RG59U or the RG59BU. These 2 types of cable, now this is where it's a little tricky because RG59, based on the vendor and who made the cable, can have either a 22 or a 20 gauge center conductor. Now, if you know anything about shotguns or you know anything about gauges, you know that the smaller the number, the bigger the diameter is. So a 20 gauge RG59U has a larger center conductor than the 22 gauge one does. So, and certainly for any purposes, a larger conductor would be better. Now, the 2 differences that you see between the RG59U and the RG59BU is that an RG59U is going to have a solid copper center, pure copper all the way through. An RG59BU is going to have typically a steel center that is a copper flashing or copper cladding on it. That is not optimal, but we also have to deal with the reality. The reality is, to use this technology of Ethernet over coax, we're going to want to use the existing coaxes. So you're going to use what's there, but you need to identify what is there so you can figure out the limitations of those particular cables. And we're going to talk about how to measure that in a little bit. Now, if it is CCTV, analog CCTV, the connectors will be BNC connectors, which you see illustrated on the upper right-hand side. Typical connector that's used on analog cameras, you know, for years and years and years. Now, when we talk about RG11, this is a cable that is commonly used for satellite dishes and cable connections coming into your house, like cable television. Now, that's going to have your multiple outer shields with a copper center conductor. And it's going to typically have a dual shield with foil and braid or a quad shield with foil and braid and a foil and braid coverage. Various types of shielding. This is where just because a cable is a coax cable doesn't make it the same as other coax cables. Different manufacturers have used different techniques over time to achieve what they wanted to achieve when they were making their cables. So you really have to look at the cable to see what's going on with it. And you may have to cut the connectors off to actually see underneath, you know, like lifting the hood of a car, see what's actually going on underneath in the actual cable itself. Now, RG stands for radio guide. And when we talked about the different RG type of cables, the 11, the 6, and the 59, the primary difference is the gauge of the center conductor. RG11, 14 gauge, RG6, 18 gauge. RG59 is going to have either a 20 or 22 gauge center conductor, and that's the most common type of cable that we will find when we go out to update an existing analog CCTV system. Notice the 2 red stars that are next to those 2 numbers. That's something that's going to be important for you to remember for your ESNT certification test. So remember that RG59 has both 20 and 22 gauge center conductor sizes. Now, as I mentioned, different manufacturers are going to have built their cables different ways, and there's good cable, there's cheap cable, there's cable that came from overseas. The key here is that just because what's labeled on the side of the cable might say one thing, but that doesn't really necessarily tell you the whole story about the cable. And I must emphasize this, that you need to know the quality of the cable you're hooking up to make sure that you'll be able to push through that cable. The Ethernet, and particularly the power over Ethernet, is what becomes the issue. if the cable is not of optimal quality. The lower the quality of the cable, the less power you'll be able to push through it, which also it corresponds to the length of the cable as well. So all these factors mean we need to kind of look at our cable pretty closely, or we need to test our cable, and I'm going to show you how to do that here in just a couple of minutes. Most of the time, if we have a connectivity problem with any kind of cable, whether it's UTP, fiber optics cable, coax cables, the problems are going to be in the connectors. It's always in the connectors. The connector, that's where I always tell my students in fiber optic classes that the problems you'll have with a fiber optic link are where somebody took the outside jacket off and touched the bare glass. That's where the problem's going to be. And in fiber, that's where you put on a connector or a splice. Exact same story with coax cable. Where the outer jacket has been removed and the connector put on, that's where the problem is. And dealers should understand this, that if you want to use this technology of using those existing coaxes, because I'm going to tell you, you're going to have to use this technology because it'll save you hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars on installation costs. And that's great. But you will have to know what kind of cable you got, and you're going to have to take those existing cables, cut off those old connectors, and put on new ones. You don't know who put the connectors on. You don't know how old they are unless you put them on yourself. You don't know what the story is. Cut the connectors off and put on new ones. This is critical with coax cables because with coax, that center conductor, because there's electricity going through it, it's going to oxidize over time. It's going to get a coating on it. We want to cut off that old connector and get to fresh copper. That's where we want to put on our new connector. Now the connector, the BNC connector, actually stands for a bayonet Neil Conselman. Hey, who knew? Well, now we know. But as I mentioned, we've got our center conductor and the return shield. The outside of the connector, the metal ring on the outside, that is, in this case it's a crimped connector, but it is electrically connected to the shielding, giving you that return path. So remember now, our coax cable, we might think of it as a one conductor. Well, it's not. It's a two conductor because it's got the two paths in. Now, there are a variety of different kinds of BNC connectors. There are cheap ones and there are good ones. The cheap ones are the kind that you screw on or crimp on. The good ones are the compression connectors. Smart alarm and security installation companies will use the compression connectors. They're not inexpensive. They cost a couple of dollars a piece. But you know what? That connector is going to stay on forever and it's never going to give you a problem. Where the other ones, the inexpensive ones, will. You are much better off putting on good connectors and saving yourself a service call that you would otherwise have to do when you're betting on some old connector that some guy installed 6 years ago. Now, once we've got this cabling and connector situation sort of in hand, we need to think about what are the possibilities. What can we do if we have existing coax cables? We see as illustrated here, and these graphics, by the way, are provided by NVT, but there are products manufactured by a number of vendors, such as ComNet, such as Veracity, such as AFT, such as Ultronics. There are a number of vendors of these products. So first of all, what does that tell you? When there's a number of vendors building basically the same product. Well, product isn't too hard to build now, is it? And there's no patents on it, is there? Right. So you're going to see a lot of vendors making this stuff. We'll use the NVT stuff as an example, though, because it is pretty good equipment and it does a nice job. Here you see an example illustrated where we can go up to 1,800 feet. That would be 1,500 feet of coax and an additional 300 feet of Cat5e cable through these NVEC1701 devices through that existing coax. Now, notice that the power supply is on the head end, which is kind of in the middle of the screen, and we're pushing the power and the Ethernet through the coax cable to the transceiver device on the far end, which is then hooked up with Cat5e, jumper cable out to the camera, in this case a 6-watt camera that we're powering. Now, various vendors have various limits to the amount of power that they will push through a coax cable. It so happens with the NVT product, up to 45 watts of power can be transmitted, assuming, important word, assuming that the cable is of decent enough quality to do that, which we'll talk about testing the cable again. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. Now here you see my kitchen at home, and here on the lower right-hand side of the screen there is an HD IP camera from Axis. It is connected up to one of the NVT interface boxes, which is run through 1,000 feet of Genesis cable, which goes into another NVT box, which goes into a network switch, which goes into my laptop, and now I have my HD video picture, 30 frames a second of 1080i resolution coming through the 1,000 feet of coax right there on my kitchen table. Ignore the wine bottles. But the point here is that this technology does work. I've tested it, and you can have faith in it, assuming that your cable quality is good. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Now, there's a couple other things that you can do. One of the things that is possible, and you can do it every day, is to connect multiple remote devices up to a single head end using these NVT devices. So keep in mind now that when we go into that existing analog camera system, the video signals, the coax cables are already coming to the head end. They're already plugged into the DVR right now, right? But we're going to replace that stuff with high-end IP, megapixel or HD resolution cameras. Everything's already pulled to the head end. That's what makes it so great, that we can use those existing cables to connect up the cameras and to power the devices, making our remote devices, and they don't have to be cameras. They could be intercoms, they could be alarm access control panels, they could be any number of IP-enabled and PoE-powered devices that we can power through this cable. It doesn't just have to be cameras. Now here you see an example where we come out of the head end on a single coax cable, but somewhere out there in the field we have a T-tap where we put in, maybe we want to add a camera to a location where there was only one camera, now the guy wants 2 cameras. Well, we can do that by putting a T connector on the first one in the line to say the existing camera, and then run new coax cable down to a second NV EC1701, which connects up to the second camera. So it's just another way to do this stuff. The more you look at this, the more you're going to see all these different methods by which you can do things. Another way that it can be done, here you see 4 cameras connected up to 1 receiver. So we've got 4 remote transmitters all hooked up to existing coax cables and Cat5e. These happen to be 10-watt cameras, which is that's a pretty robust amount of volt current they're using. But we can power them all with the single power supply that's in the head end. So this is a technology that is very, very flexible and very, very usable in our industry. Here you see what you do if your cameras are, say, pan tilt zoom, outdoor, heater, blower. They've got to pull 25 or 35 watts of power. Well, you can remotely power. You can put the power supplies out on the far end if you want to, if you need to. It's not the optimal way to do it. There's higher cost involved here. You're buying all these power supplies. But you can remotely power the devices that way if you want, and then you don't have to power the one on the other end because it gets its power through the coaxial cable. And here you see just one more example where instead of connecting a single camera, we hook up a network switch. Power over Ethernet switches can be purchased for less than $100 at ADI or any product distributor. That switch could be connected up remotely, and connected to that switch could be PoE or non-PoE cameras, intercoms, access control readers, alarm panels that are transmitting alarm signals. Whatever you want to hook up could be hooked up to that remote switch because it's just an Ethernet switch. It's the same as the switch that's probably sitting on your desk right now. It just happens to be on the end of 2,500 feet of coaxial cable. Now, to do this successfully, there are things you need to know. You need to know the center conductor size if you can figure it out, and it's usually on a modern cable it's going to be labeled on the side. If it's not, pardon me, labeled, that might be a little difficult to figure it out. You might have to just guess. The construction of the center conductor you can figure out because you can look at it and you can tell whether it's pure copper or whether it's copper-clad steel. So you can tell that pretty easily. Now, the length of the cable and the resistance of the existing coax, these are the two elements that you got to know to use this technology. And notice again the double red stars. You will see this information on your ESNT certification test. So remember, you need to know the length of the existing coax and you need to measure the resistance of the existing coax. Now, to get the length of the coax, there's a number of vendors who build testers. The kind of tester that tells you the length of a cable, the common terminology for it is called a TDR, a time domain reflectometer. And there's any number of vendors that make these. The one that we're going to work with here is from a company called the Byte Brothers. I personally like this tester because it works and it's also inexpensive, and I'm into things that are cheap and work. But this will tell you the length of your coaxial cables. So all you do with this tester is you hook it up to one end of the coax and you fire up the distance test. Boom. It tells you right here, if you look very closely, you'll see that it's telling me or telling us that this box of cable that I'm testing is 925 feet long. I have cut some of the cable off in the process of doing some testing, so it's telling me how long my coax cable is. It's just that easy to find out how long the coax cable is, and that's important information to have. Now, the other thing that you need to know is the resistance of the cable. Now, to do this, we need a multimeter or a volt-ohm meter, the common meter that alarm technicians use. This one right here is a triplet meter. It's not very expensive. Everybody should have a meter, electrical meter. But what you're going to do is you're going to take your meter, you're going to set it up to read resistance, to read ohms, because that's what we're looking for. And you see here where I'm taking the jumper cable that I'm going to attach at the far end, and I'm testing it for its resistance itself. And I can see that it has 7/10 of an ohm of resistance just in that jumper cable. So I have to factor that into my calculations. Then I'm going to take that jumper to the far end of the cable that I'm going to test. I'm going to go from the center pin. I'm going to clip one end of the jumper to the center pin. I'm going to clip the other end to the outside of the metal ring for the connector. That jumps out or shorts out the connector. Then I'm going to read my resistance. Now, since I had 7/10 of an ohm of resistance in the jumper itself, the resistance I'm reading right here is 17 ohms of resistance in this 925-foot piece of cable. So now I know how much resistance is in my cable, and it's this resistance number is very important because it is the key to tell you how much power you can push. So when we look at the manufacturer, whether it's Veracity or NVT or Ultronics or Land Power, ComNet, they're going to have information, a chart, they might have an Excel spreadsheet. They'll have something that tells you, okay, based on the resistance of the cable, this is how much power you can push through this cable. So the real key item here is looking at the second column from the left and looking at the resistance number. Our resistance number was 17, so maybe we err to the side of caution. We say, okay, this cable's got a 19 ohms of resistance, and at 19 ohms of resistance, the maximum power I can put through that cable is 8 watts of PoE power. So now I know how much power I can push through it. Now, the shorter the cable would be, say the cable was a couple hundred feet long, the resistance would be much less, and that would allow me to do a whole lot more power. But when I get out into the farther reaches of cable distance, like in this case we're out almost 1,000, we're out 1,000 feet or so, you're going to you might be in the single digits in terms of the amount of watts of power that you can push through. Now let's just step back for a minute and consider that the standard form factor IP camera, non-pan, tilt, and zoom, non-outdoors, an indoor fixed camera, it's typically going to draw 4 to 6 watts of PoE power when it is operating. Even a pan, tilt, and zoom camera, a modern one that is indoors, no heater and blower, will probably draw 5 watts or 6 watts of maximum power. So we have sufficient power at 8 watts to do a pan, tilt, and zoom camera indoors, and we can do it for 925 feet of distance by doing this test, reading the resistance, and then looking at the chart. This gives us also the ability, it's not just going out to the end of the coax, but we also then can extend from there using Cat5e UTP cable. We've got another 100 meters or 328 feet that we can go from the NVT or the Veracity or whoever the manufacturer is. We can go from their interface transceiver out to the remote IP device or the network switch, if that's what you want to put out there. You got another 328 feet. So here you see an example where I've got the HD IP camera that's in the lower right hand side pushing out a video signal that's going through 500 feet of Cat5e cable, which is what's in that REMI box, 1,000 feet of coax cable, and then it's coming onto my computer screen. So you see that this gives you great distance flexibility. One of the things that's kept a lot of security dealers from getting heavily involved in IP devices is, well, I can only go 328 feet. Well, it's not that way anymore now that we have this ability to use coax cable to go much, much further distances. Now there are devices that are made, this is another Byte Brothers product, that will test the amount of PoE power that's available and also how much PoE power is being pulled by any particular device. So here you see an example where with this power panel tester, if we hook it up in line with a PoE enabled device, it's going to tell us how much current that device is pulling in watts. So then we can tell, well, are we overdrawing what our system can do? How much power does this thing actually need? And it's useful information to have to make sure that you're not trying to do more with your system or more with your power than you can, than it's possible or is sustainable. Let's call it that. That's the PoE and Ethernet information. Now we're going to talk about the second of the curriculum items that's been added, and that has to do with cloud recording and video management systems. There is a movement in our business increasingly to provide either remote video storage for our customers, for the end user, and or do internet recording of the video. Along with this cloud recording concept, taking this stored video away from the local system and putting it somewhere else, storing it somewhere else, there's also the video management systems. Video management system is a computer software hardware combination that basically runs your cameras for you, runs the recording, manages the video, records the alarm conditions, and generates alarms when certain events occur that are programmed for it. Basically, it is a brain that we can program to say, watch this video system for us, and if these certain events occur, we want you to enunciate them a certain way. There's been studies done where people who are watching video monitors, traditional CCTV monitors, after watching them for 12 minutes, they don't see them anymore. People can't do this, particularly with the number of cameras that are out there now. It's an impossibility. We have to have a computer system that's going to watch the cameras for us and then enunciate unusual alarm conditions. When things go wrong or something is weird, we want to see that. We want it enunciated to us. We want it kicked up on the screen for us. That's what your video management system is going to do. Now, first, when we talk about cloud recording, understand that the driver here, there's really 3 drivers that are taking the industry towards cloud recording. Well, there's 4. The first one is everybody's got a broadband internet connection. Every customer, virtually every customer, has a DSL cable modem T1. They've got a broadband internet connection, which gives us the ability to record their video over the internet. That's the first thing. The second thing is that when we do the recording remotely, or we do cloud recording, you know what? We reduce the cost of the initial system because we eliminate the NVR or DVR that we would otherwise sell the customer. If we don't have to supply an NVR or DVR, hey, system costs less money. And in this business, less money is good. The third thing is that when we store the video locally, that video can be tampered with. It can be tampered with by burglars who break in and they try to break the DVR or NVR, or inside employees who want to erase some embarrassing or potentially, video that's showing them stealing stuff. When we take the video out of the location, I hope you see that that video is more secure because it's not in the building. It can't be tampered with. It is stored somewhere else. Now, a fourth reason that video cloud recording is becoming more and more popular is that it reduces service exposure for security installation companies. What is a DVR? What is an NVR? It's a box. It's a box with software. It's a box with some inputs, some interfacing devices, and it's a hard drive, right? And what do hard drives do? Hard drives fail. They fail. They break. And when they do, it's a big problem. Now, if we don't install the NVR or DVR, we don't have to service the NVR or DVR. It can't break if it's not there. So that is another advantage for security dealers to provide this cloud or remote recording. The fourth advantage is that now when we start, if we're a security dealer and we start to supply cloud recording to our customer, we can charge them a monthly fee or a quarterly or annual fee to store their video for them. This is a magic device or a magic system to increase recurring monthly revenue. We can charge them more because we're storing their video for them. This makes more money for the electronic security dealer. So it's really a winner every way you look at it. Now, the thing to understand about video as recorded over the internet is it's not going to necessarily be high frame rate and high resolution. There's limiting factors. And what limits the factors that limit the amount of video that can go through an internet connection are not only the uplink from the premise where the cameras are up to the internet, but it's also the downlink to the viewer. And wherever that pipe, if you think of them as water pipes, there's an uplink water pipe and a downlink water pipe. Every internet connection is two pipes that come into the building. One goes up to the internet, one comes down. If you think of them as water pipes, wherever the pipe is the thinnest, that is going to dictate how many frames per second and at what resolution we can get video through the internet so that the end user can view it. And the rule of thumb says you're going to get 3 to 5 frames per second. That's about it. So this is something that it's important that if this is being sold to the customer, oh yeah, we're going to record your video for you on the internet, or we're going to record the video for it on our system, and I'll get to that part in a minute, you're going to get 5 frames a second. And then that should be demonstrated to the customer using a live camera that's hooked up through your system. Hey, here's what it's going to look like. And show the customer some movement, some cars going by, or some people walking by, so the customer can see this is the kind of video they're going to get. Now, they could update their internet connection. They could get a bigger internet connection. But in my opinion, when we sell these systems to the end users, we don't want to tell them they have to change anything. We don't want to tell them they have to pay more money to Comcast or to AT&T. We want them to pay more money to us, the security company, right? So, hey, we can use your internet connection, no problem. But, and as you see with the 2 red stars here, remember that it's both the uplink from the camera and the downlink to the recording server or viewer. Those 2 items are going to dictate how much video, how many frames per second that you can get when you do remote recording. So here you see an illustration where we've got a client's office on the left-hand side, we've got the client's house on the right-hand side. Client's got a DSL in his office. Client's got a cable modem in his house. He's watching, he wants to and is watching the video from the camera at his office. He's watching it at his house. That's great. Or he's watching it on his smartphone, or he's watching it on his tablet, or he's watching it through any number of internet-connected devices. But the uplink of the video, how big is that pipe? And the downlink, how big is that pipe? Now, and realistically, things like smartphones and tablet computers, 4G, 3G devices that are getting their internet connection via cellular communications, those pipes are very small and they have a ton of packet loss. So the video viewed through those devices is not going to be perfect, and it will vary based on where the guy's standing when he fires up his iPhone and says, I want to look at my dog at home, right? So in certain areas, he's going to have better coverage than he does in others. So these are the things that the customer needs to understand, so we keep our customer satisfied. He got what he thought he was going to get. Now here you see an example where we've got a customer who's got 3 remote locations and we've got a main office. Now this is a situation where the ability to remote record can make a huge difference in whether a security company gets the business or not. If we have 2 companies bidding on this system, this guy wants 1 camera in each location and he wants them recorded. Simple enough. We've got dealer number 1, who's an old school person, who says, oh yeah, I'll put an analog camera and a DVR in every location. That'll work. Yes, it will. That'll work just fine. But then we've got dealer number 2. Dealer number 2 is smart, and what she says is she says to the customer, Mr. Customer, do you have internet connections, broadband internet connections at each of your locations? Well, of course I do. That's how we do our credit card transactions. Oh, great. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put 1 camera in each of your locations. We're going to record them over the internet, and all the recording will happen at your main office where we will put the NVR. In this case, we're going to give him localized recording over the internet over his NVR. Or we could simply put a camera in every location and we could record them up on the internet. Now here you see an example, and you see my smiling face in the lower right hand side because in my house I have a camera that is recorded on the internet through a company called SecureVision. SecureVision is one of, frankly, many companies who are offering internet recording of cameras. SecureVision is a company that will do your cameras. As a security dealer, will do your cameras 5 frames a second, and they'll store them for 2 weeks, and the charge is $5 or $6 a month per camera. This is a fabulous technology because now you can come in to your customer, put in a 1 or 2 cameras or a whole bunch of cameras. SecureVision will do any number of cameras you want to do. If the guy wanted to look at his 4 stores we saw in the previous slide, easily done. All 4 stores come up live on the screen at the same time. This is some fabulous stuff here, and it's inexpensive. And that's what they charge you, the dealer. You, of course, are going to take that $5 monthly charge, and you're going to charge the customer what? $15. Yeah, I'm recording your video for you. It's $15. I will also point out that along with other vendors, this product here from SecureVision, what you see on the screen, this can be totally customized. So instead of it saying SecureVision, it says ABC Alarm, or it says Joe's Lock and Alarm. You can make this website be your website. That's where they're going to look at their video, and that's who they're paying to record it. This is some real exciting technology that dealers need to know about, and it's an important thing because this is where our industry is going in terms of the recording of video for small to medium applications. Now, I understand and you understand that there are companies and our locations who need very, very high quality security systems. Banks, drugstores, gun stores, pharmacies, jewelry stores. Those places need high security, and they probably need multiple recording methods. Record it locally and record it over the internet. And here's another example of where you can use a technology like Secure Vision. You could offer this to your customers, because the camera that you're looking at right here is not only recorded on the internet at Secure Vision, it's also recorded on the NVR in my house. So I'm recording it in two places at the same time. So we can give the customer, by using something like this, we can take critical cameras, the ones that are really important, the camera that's looking at the safe, we can take that camera and we could also record it over the internet as well as record it remotely. So, or pardon me, as well as record it locally. So there's a lot that can be done here to enhance the security of the video, stored video for our customer, and to increase our recurring monthly revenue that we're charging that customer to provide them with the service. Now, the VMS or video management systems, these are typically, it's a PC, it's a desktop kind of PC that has a software-based platform that's going to do the video management for the dealer. VMS systems are going to go into larger systems where there's 20 or 30 or more cameras, where there's a lot going on, where they possibly want to integrate with access control systems and intercom systems, so that if somebody shows up at a reader outside a building and presents a card that's expired or has been invalidated, that immediately that camera pops up on the screen, and the guard who is supposed to be watching the screen is immediately audibly notified, hey, there's something going on at door number 3, take a look, here's this guy trying to pass a bad card. This is what video management systems do. It is a brain that is programmed to manage and control and record the video systems, and also to integrate them to access control and badging systems and intercom systems and the like. Now, when you are looking at video management systems, the equipment you use is critical, and what's critical about it is you can't watch, let's say, 16 or 20 cameras simultaneously on a $400 or $500 PC. It won't work. That PC does not have enough processing horsepower, to cross metaphors here, does not have enough processing power to process all those video signals at once. So the guy's not going to be able to see them. It is very important that you work closely with the VMS manufacturer when they say this is the minimum PC requirements to run this particular set of software for this number of cameras, using whether they're megapixel or HD cameras, the amount of video that's coming in. All these things have to be sized up, and you have to use the PCs that they tell you to, or at least the ones that meet the minimum requirements that they talk about, or else it won't work. So that's very important. Now, the other thing that you've got to look at is your hard drive storage. How much storage does the customer require of the video? Now, this is changing in our industry as well. There's more people, there's more systems where video is just being recorded if there's motion. If there's no motion, we won't record it. But there's always going to be customers who say, I want 24/7 video, I want so many frames a second. Hey, we can do all those things on the local network, not through the internet. The pipes aren't big enough, but the pipes in the local network are plenty big that we can give them 30 frames a second if that's what they want, and we can give them high resolution and megapixel and HD if that's what they want. But All of those factors are going to greatly increase the hard drive space required to store the amount of video that the customer wants. So this is where you have to work with both the camera vendors, the camera manufacturer, to say, okay, I'm going to use these cameras, and if I set them for 30 frames a second at, real high resolution, what's this camera going to put out bandwidth-wise? Well, it's going to put out 4 megabits per second of video. Okay. Well, that means I got to store 4 megabits per second. And when you start doing the math, you start ending up in the terabyte and petabyte range for the size of the hard drives. Now, the good news is you can buy terabyte hard drives now pretty inexpensively, but still, you've got to know how much storage you need, and all these things have to be calculated together and carefully planned so that the system will work the way the customer wants it to, and the amount of storage will be there for the customer to be able to review the video. So what this brings us to is that typically we buy, in our industry, VMS systems are purchased as a bundled kit from a single vendor. This gives you, as a security dealer, the ability to get the software pre-installed, pre-configured for the number of cameras you're going to do, the type of cameras, what it is you want to have happen. The product, the system is shipped to you with the monitor, with the PC, with everything you need. It's all preset and ready to go. So this is really the way to go. If you want to make your own VMS systems, you can do that, but you better be very computer knowledgeable. Otherwise, you're better off buying a bundled system. And it says WMS up there. I understand that it should say VMS. But we continue. Now, notice the 2 red stars on the lower right-hand side. On your ESNT certification test, there's a question about VMS systems, and there's a question, it goes something like, how many cameras can you put on a VMS system? And the answer is, how many licenses did you buy from the VMS vendor, because that is normally the way their systems are priced. How many cameras do you want to do? I want to do 24 cameras. Well, that's 24 camera licenses. I want to do 67 cameras. That's 67 camera licenses. Also be aware that with some VMS vendors, not all, but some, there are ongoing software support and updating fees. This is an issue in our business. Is it good? Is it bad? Well, it considers who the vendor is, and if you're happy with the vendor, and if they bring out some updates that do some things that perhaps their product couldn't do before, or does it better than it did before, maybe that's a bonus to your client, but there could well be ongoing costs. You've got to plan for these ongoing costs when you think about how you're going to write your contract with the customer. There's going to be an annual update fee. Okay, fine. How much is it going to be? How much are we going to mark it up? And then make the customer aware, the end user aware, that indeed this fee is going to occur. So that's kind of a financial gotcha that you don't want to get burned on. You need to know that these things can happen. Now here you see an example from Exact of a VMS system. Real simple. This is where we can look at different locations. We could have local cameras. We could have cameras from across the country or across the world. We can have all these cameras coming up on the same screen at the same time. We can be looking at live video as well as looking at recorded video. We can be looking at the same scene, except one is live and one was recorded 10 minutes ago, and compare the scenes. When did the red car leave the parking lot? Well, we can figure these things out by using these VMS systems. So this is what it does. It makes the surveillance video that's been recorded, makes it usable, makes it so that the information that's in it that has been recorded can be mined and can be extracted so that the end user can see what they need to see when they need to see it. So that is the goal, and that's what a VMS system will do for your customer. Now, what are our keys to successful VMS deployment? Very careful planning of the system. This is critical. You've got to know exactly how many cameras, how big the image sizes are going to be. Are they going to be megapixel or HD cameras? The compression format you're going to use. All of these things must be included in your calculations that you're going to give to the VMS vendor to say, okay, this is the system I need to do. The second issue, and it probably should be the first issue, frankly, in terms of importance, is understanding your client's expectations. What does the client expect to be able to do? We want to meet or exceed those expectations. We also want to get a system that is simple enough to use so that the client can actually use it. It's not a good situation if you sell your customer a very complicated system that they can't figure out how to run it. Well, they're not going to be happy about that. So we need to understand the client's expectations, who's going to run the system, and will it do what they want it to do. Sizing of video storage is very important. How many weeks of video do they need? How many days of video do they need? Then you're going to work with your vendor to provide a bundled solution. In most cases, it's easier that way. It's easier for you, and you also have a fallback position of somebody to point a finger at in the event that things don't work properly or exactly as planned. You've got the vendor to work with to try to solve these issues. So I recommend to you to look for a bundled solution. And a key element here, and it could take us back to that remote recording over the internet. What happens when the hard drives fail in the VMS PC, in the VMS desktop computer? What happens? Is it configured as a RAID 5 so that the data is being recorded on multiple drives so that we don't lose any of the data? This is very important. You have to assume that hard drives will fail. I will point out to you here that most hard drive manufacturers in the overall IT computer world, not necessarily in our world of electronic security, most hard drives are not necessarily designed for what we use them for, which is constantly writing video onto them. Most hard drives are accessed, people pull a file off of them, they put a file back onto them, then the hard drive's sitting there doing, like, spinning, but it's sitting there doing nothing, and then somebody else puts a file on or pulls a file off. They get used kind of sporadically, but in our business, when we're feeding video into that hard drive, it's going to be a 24/7 thing. You need to expect the hard drives to fail, because they will. Year and a half, 2 years on the outside, maybe. Well, what's going to happen when the hard drive fails? How are we backing up the video in the event that this is going to happen? This is something you can work with the IT person on, if there is an IT person at the location, to say, well, we need this drive backed up, once a day or once a week, at least, at a minimum, so that we've got the video storage in the event that they want to look at something that happened 2 or 3 weeks ago. The video information is still available. Just remember, hard drives fail, and you got to plan for that failure. The next issue that was added to the curriculum has to do with high-definition IP video. One of the things that's driving the sales of IP cameras, surveillance cameras in our industry, is the fact that many of the major manufacturers are delivering surveillance cameras that are HD cameras. What kind of television sets do your customers have in their homes? HD TV. That's what you got in your house. That's what I got in my house, right? It's a bigger picture. It's a better picture. It's got more pixels. It's got more resolution. So we have a standard for HD IP surveillance cameras. And what this standard sets is that it's going to be 30 frames a second. It's going to be 1080i or 1080p resolution. And the aspect ratio, from how tall the screen is to how wide the screen is is going to be 16 by 9. Notice that those 3 items have got the red stars on them. You will see those on your ESNT test. You need to remember them. Here you see a simple illustration of what your HD formats look like. Notice that when we talk about 1080 resolution, we're talking about the up and down, we're talking about the vertical, and then we get 1920 across the horizontal. This gives us well over 1 million pixels on our picture. Keep in mind that not every monitor that your customer may have existing can see these HD images incomplete. They can't see the whole picture. When I look at an Axis HD camera through my laptop computer, I only can see a portion of the picture. I actually have to move the image around so that I can see other parts of it, because the screen on my laptop, it isn't big enough to show this particular an HD 1080i image. So this is where you need to think about, if you're providing the customer with HD image cameras, well, they better have something they can view the HD on. Otherwise, you've sold them something that isn't necessarily real usable. And in my opinion, it would be a disservice to your customer. You want to sell them something that they can look at it and say, wow, that's a good looking picture. That's an HD picture. It sure is, Mr. Johnson. That's what you bought. So make sure that they've got a monitor that is big enough and can do HD resolution, can display it. Now, the last item that has been added to the curriculum has to do with your field of view and your pixel calculations. Many dealers are not familiar. There's a concept in our business that if you go megapixel or you go HDIP camera, it's just going to be great. I mean, it's a one size fits all. Man, I put this megapixel camera in, it's going to be fantastic. Not necessarily so. What's important to understand is that, like I just mentioned, and it's on the bottom of the screen here, your megapixel, and all megapixel means is you got more than 1 million pixels in the picture, and or your HDIP cameras, the image they provide is larger, but it's not necessarily better. You cannot necessarily see farther than you can with a normal resolution camera. You get a bigger picture. That's what you get. And it's the number of horizontal pictures that determines the quality of the image and how that information can be viewed. So we need to think about how many pixels per image foot are going to be in our picture. So if we are taking a camera and we're aiming it at the front door of a building and from the inside, and we want to, let's say, recognize a person. To recognize a person, we need 25 pixels per horizontal foot to recognize that person. We need 40 pixels to identify the person. The difference between identify and recognize, you know who the guy is. Oh yeah, that's Charlie. Identify is take these pictures to the police because this is the guy that snuck into our building. We've never seen him before. If we want that kind of resolution so that we can identify a person, we need at least 40 pixels per horizontal foot to get us good enough video to identify. And as you know, with any video, be it analog or IP, the lighting of the scene is absolutely critical. Whether you're using infrared lighting at night, whatever you're doing, if the scene is not well lit, the image quality is not going to be good. So that factors in as well to what we're going to get when we look at these pictures. Now, the good news is that there's the manufacturers of high-end cameras, for example, ESNT, they provide calculation software that allows you to figure out what it is you need to know. So if you look at this box on the right-hand side of the screen, you see what is known and you see what's a variable. So if you know the pixel density, you want to do 45 pixels per foot, and your field of view is at 100 feet, it needs 4,500 pixels. The math is easy. And it's the same if you know the pixels in field of view, but you don't know the pixel density. And then it's the same if you know the pixels and the pixel density, but you don't know the field of view. So you can use this software to calculate how big will be the field of view given the number of pixels you need to achieve the kind of the quality of picture that you want. Now this is something that's very important on your higher end systems. You know, if you're going to put a camera in my house so we can watch the dog, hey, the number of pixels really doesn't matter. But if you are doing commercial systems, high-end systems, want to give your customer the best possible setup so that he or she gets the best information they can get, then you've got to consider this pixel calculation count. And just remember, let's step back one slide to remember these issues again. If we want to identify a person, we need 40 pixels per foot. If we want to recognize a person, we need 25 pixels per foot. Those are the two things that you need to remember. Now, when you have specific requirements from your customer, this is where the engineering of the system becomes very important. Because if a customer says they want a certain quality of image, they want to be able to do video analytics, they want a certain amount of storage, all of these things must be taken into account if you expect to achieve the customer's goal of what they want and meet what they want so you can install the systems and get paid. The good news is that every vendor in the high end of our business now has, everyone that I've met, and I meet lots of them, they have very, very intelligent people who are their field operatives, their field sales engineers. They're more than happy to assist you in planning out a feature-rich system and figuring out, and they're happy to work together too. You have some companies that are simply, they make the VMS systems, and they will work with cameras from a great number of vendors. So you can pick a VMS system you want to use, then you can look at the cameras that work with that VMS system, and between the vendors and the engineers in your company, or if you're doing it yourself, you can properly plan these systems out. They're not something to be afraid of, but they are something that must be carefully designed so that they will meet the customer's specifications when the system is done. Now this is the end of the 2013 update webinar for the ESNT training program. At this point, if you have viewed the other 9 webinars before this, you are ready to, and you are confident, you are ready to take your online practice test. To receive your username and password for the online practice test, you need to email slaytonsolutions@sbcglobal.net and use the secret word TOPSHOT. When I receive that secret word from you, I will issue you a username and password to take your ESNT practice test. You want to take this test without your notes, closed book. You take this test, and if you take this test and you can score at least 43 out of 50 on those questions, then you're ready to go to your local junior college or technical school and take your ESNT formal certification test. In the event that you take the practice test and you don't do well or well enough, you can take it again. You can take it as many times as you want, but remember to take it as a closed book test because your ESNT certification test will be a closed book test. You will have no notes, you will have no iPhone, you will have nothing to help you. You will have to sit in front of that computer, take the test, and pass it. So now's the time for you to take your practice test, and this is how you receive the information. Along with this update webinar, on the disk or shipped to you is a PDF of all these slides so that you can review them as need be. Remember, where you see the double red stars, that's information that you absolutely must remember to pass your test. I thank you for your time and your interest in the ESNT training and certification program.